Hello, everybody. Welcome back. I am Skelegun again. Welcome to my spooky lair. So today I'm going to be talking to you about Day of the Dead Bloodline, which is a 2018 Bulgarian-American horror action film directed by Hector Hernandez Vicens? I don't know. Anyways, so before I talk about this film, I just want to talk a little bit about the history of the Day of the Dead title and zombie movies in general, because I used to be very passionate about zombie movies. I think as most people who were 14 at one point tend to be. So, back in 1968, George A. Romero and John Russo created the movie Night of the Living Dead, which would redefine the zombie genre. Before that, zombies were typically associated with voodoo, hence that's basically the origin of the word zombie, it comes from voodoo. The idea of a zombie used to be, in the voodoo sense, it is someone who is raised from the dead by a Bokor, and they're typically used as slaves. They're used as slave labor. Now, I don't want to go into the whole thing about whether or not they really exist. There is some evidence to suggest that fugu powder, or whatever it is, like tetrotoxins. Go see The Serpent and the Rainbow if you want to learn about real-life zombie stuff. Basically, what happened with Night of the Living Dead was George A. Romero wanted to make a movie adaptation of I Am Legend, but he didn't want to pay royalties or anything, so instead of having vampires, he rewrote them as ghouls. And they're never actually referred to as zombies in the movie, from what I remember. But yeah, so these zombies in his movie were basically followed more the idea of a ghoul, which is an undead creature which eats human flesh. This movie came out, and it just, took off, and it became this huge success, and it redefined the genre. You got tons and tons of copycat movies coming out shortly after, and around that time, Romero and Russo, they had a falling out. So that brings us to Dawn of the Dead, which was the sequel. I don't have the year written down here. It came out in the 70s. Dawn of the Dead became as a cultural milestone. It was a very smart movie, but it was also a very fun movie. People comment on how it's kind of like with Alien, you had a very tight, cramped horror movie, and then in Aliens, you had more of a wham-bang, pow-pow action movie. Dawn of the Dead was much more of a action movie than Night was. So, after that, George A. Romero, he had some difficulties with the studio. Studios didn't like how gory his movies were. They wanted him to tone them down and make them more user-friendly. But Romero was a very uncompromising artist. He stuck by his guns, but the studio, they kept saying, hey, Dawn of the Dead was such a smash success, you really need to make another one. So he wrote a sequel to Dawn of the Dead called Day of the Dead. Now, the script he wrote was not what ended up being filmed, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. What I want to mention first is that Romero had written his original script, and basically it would have cost a ton of money. And the studio was like, look, we know you want to make this movie, we want you to make this movie, but the thing is, you want this movie to be unrated, and we can't do that, because this was around a time where there was all this kind of moral panic going on, and theaters were not showing unrated movies. So they said, if you want to get this money to make this movie, you need to take an R rating. Romero refused to compromise, so they literally slashed the budget for the movie in half, which caused him to have to rewrite the whole movie, basically boiling it down to its essential. And also, I feel like in the process there, he became very disillusioned and sort of very cynical. So what you have is an extremely dark film. Day of the Dead is, of the original Night, Dawn, Day trilogy, it is the most forbidding, it is the darkest and for many people, it's the most off-putting film in the series. It's not welcoming. Night of the Living Dead is kind of simple and enjoyable. It's got some really dark themes for the time, but the gore is not really there, and the characters are okay. It's a good movie. I mean, I feel like Night of the Living Dead is the weakest of the trilogy, but that's just me. And then you have Dawn of the Dead, which has these very likable characters, and there's action, and there's suspense. And then you get to Day, and Day is something else. It's the goriest movie of the series. It really, like, some of the scenes are just genuinely, like, disgusting, and I have a pretty strong stomach, and there are some scenes that still kind of gross me out. And keep in mind, I worked at a funeral home for a year. I was a mortician's apprentice, so I've seen humans inside and out, and I still think some of these scenes are a bit extreme. And another complaint that people have about Day is that the characters are all unlikable. Everyone is just miserable and bitter, and all they do is squabble. And by the end of the movie, you basically want the zombies to win. And really, the only really sympathetic character in the movie is a zombie, which I'll explain. So Night of the Living Dead takes place at the beginning of the zombie apocalypse. The dead are just beginning to rise. It's a very recent phenomenon, and people are having immediate reactions to it. The sequel, Dawn of the Dead, it's never a specific time frame I don't think is ever given, but it's clear that this is several months to maybe a year into the apocalypse. Society is breaking down. You can tell that the initial onslaught was held back, but it's like society's held together by martial law, and that outside of the cities, it's basically free for all, do whatever you want, it's anarchy out there, baby. So that brings us to Day of the Dead, which takes place, I believe, maybe like 2 or 3 years. I think in Day of the Dead they may actually say how long it's been, or at least they say it's been a very long time since they've heard from anybody else. Basically, it's about an underground military base that is very remote, and all that's left are a few soldiers and a couple of scientists and a helicopter pilot, and basically the soldiers are just trying to stay alive, while the scientists are trying to, in vain, do research and see if they can wield results. And it's mentioned that there was a sort of nicer captain guy who tolerated the scientists, but he's dead by the time the movie begins, and the helicopter pilot and one of the scientist ladies, they come back to find out he's dead, and that his subordinate Captain Rhodes has taken over, and that Captain Rhodes is just this sort of meathead Neanderthal, despicable, basically like Tumblr's worst nightmare. He is like a sexist, racist comic book villain cranked to 11. He's just unbearable, and his soldier allies, his like soldier clique, are also all pretty terrible. There's like one guy who's just kind of there's two like nondescript guys who they're gonna die off pretty soon, and then there's like the loyal second in command who's just kind of this like brutish caveman like figure, and then the other soldier is, I think his name was Miguel, and he is sleeping with the scientist lady. Miguel is clearly in like having severe PTSD. He is barely held together. He is not in good shape. And then on the scientist team, you have like the lady scientist, I wish I remembered her name, and then some other scientist guy who's unimportant, and then Dr. Frankenstein, who is this kind of mad doctor who's performing these disgusting experiments on the zombies that they've captured and keep in a cave in the back of the facility. And one of his zombies he's keeping is one he's nicknamed Bub, and he's basically trained Bub through the use of treats. He's used positive reinforcement to turn Bub into kind of pacify Bub. Basically what happens is there's an accident and 2 of the soldiers end up getting killed. Miguel is useless. He's so the soldier team, they're down a bunch of guys and they get mad at the scientist team, and things don't go so well when they find out that the dead soldiers have been cut up by Dr. Frankenstein and he's giving them to the zombies as treats. It leads to some conflict, and it ends up with Dr. Frankenstein getting killed and Miguel deciding to commit suicide by opening the gates and letting zombies flood the bunker. And in the ensuing process, all the soldiers end up getting very gruesomely ripped to shreds, and the lady scientist and the helicopter pilot and the drunk radio operator guy, they escape together, and poor old Bub is just left mourning the loss of Dr. Frankenstein. And yeah, so to the original script was much different, however. It had basically, instead of a handful of people living in this underground bunker, it was like a multi-tier society where it was set on an island in Florida, and the poor and basically poor civilians lived above ground in a jungle where they were prey to, alligators and snakes and also wandering zombies, while the rich and powerful and the military guys, they all lived below ground in the bunker. And Captain Rhodes was just sort of a crony of the former governor of Florida named Gasparilla, who ruled it as perverse tyrant, had these decadent parties below ground, and there was a plot where the scientist faction were trying to train an army of domesticated zombies, and which included Bub. It also included one named Tonto, who was a zombified Native American fellow, and there was a couple other zombies in the group that had names. Anyways, though, they were sort of the first generation of this program to train zombies to fight other zombies, and they were even trained in using weapons, and the plan was that they would eventually release this army of zombies onto the mainland and have them mop up the evil zombies. This doesn't go as planned. There's Dr. Frankenstein has his assistant suicide bomb the facility, and it causes the semi-trained zombie soldiers to escape, and it leads to a big battle between the semi-feral, semi-trained zombies, and then the loyal, trained zombies, and then the lady scientist character who was just one of the civilians above ground, her and a bunch of other people, including some of the army guys who were decent people escaping. And then at the end there's a big feast where the zombies all burst into Gasparilla's gymnasium where he's having this decadent party, and they feast on all these rich folk. It's all very Marxist. But anyways, and the big ending to that also was that one of the guys who was helping them, one of the soldiers who was helping them escape, got shot, and he's on the boat and he's dying. And keep in mind, in this universe, anyone who dies under any circumstance will come back as a zombie. And the people on the boat, they're like, well, he's going to turn to a zombie. We should kick him off the boat or shoot him in the head or something. And they, for some reason, they're just kind of like, no, let's wait and see. And then they wait and see, and he doesn't come back from the dead. And then it's kind of like, yay, it's over. The dead aren't going to rise anymore, I guess. And that was meant to kind of end the series, which it really should have ended the series, because after this, George Romero would go on to make Land of the Dead, which was a movie I liked when I saw it, but upon seeing it a little bit older, it's a garbage movie. Diary of the Dead, which many people say was a garbage movie, I actually liked, because it's a found footage movie, and I thought it was pretty effective. But then he also went on to do Survival of the Dead, which is, honestly, it's one of the worst movies I think I've ever seen. It's, I shouldn't even say it's the worst movie I've ever seen, but it's one of the most disappointing movies I've ever seen, given that George A. Romero used to be such a, titan of the horror industry. See how low he fell. And, yeah, George A. Romero just recently passed on a couple months ago. It was pretty sad, but anyways. So that's about the history and plot of the original Day of the Dead. Fast forward to 2005, Day of the Dead 2 Contagium, which was a completely unrelated zombie movie that I guess they somehow got rights to the Day of the Dead title, so they tied it into it, even though, like I said, nothing to do with the original. And then in 2008, there was a Day of the Dead quote-unquote remake starring Mina Suvari, Nick Cannon, and Ving Rhames. I remember seeing this movie and thinking it was one of the dumbest movies I had ever seen. It was closer to the original than Day of the Dead 2 Contagium was. I guess this movie was theoretically supposed to be a remake, but it really wasn't. The only sort of thing that really linked it together is Ving Rhames' character's name was Captain Rhodes, and there was a soldier named Bub who was a vegetarian or a vegan, and the joke was that when he turned into a zombie, he was unwilling to eat humans because he was a vegetarian, so he was kind of like still a, friendly zombie who I think helped them out. Yeah, it was really, really stupid, goofy movie. So anyways, that is the history of the Day of the Dead franchise. That brings us up to the present with this newly released Bulgarian film, Day of the Dead Bloodline. I'm gonna give this filmy a looky-looey, and then I'll report back to Yui. Can't wait. Catch you on the other side. Hello everybody, welcome back. I just finished watching Day of the Dead Bloodline. So, I think it's important to start off by saying that this movie is far superior to Day of the Dead 2 Contagium, and also the 2008 remake, just called Day of the Dead. It's still a bad movie, and it's still, vastly inferior to Day of the Dead. What is interesting about this movie, though, is that it does actually... I get the sense from watching this that it may have been written by someone who read the original script for Day of the Dead and wanted to try to include elements of that. And so let me kind of give you a little bit of a summary. So the movie begins with the main character. Her name is Zoe Parker. She's wandering around the streets. There's zombies attacking people. Everything's, going down. Everything's going bad. It's a bad time, people getting chomped and stuff. And then she's like, oh, this is, the beginning or whatever. And then it cuts to, like, a few hours prior to that. She's a med student, and she's getting ready to graduate from med school. And I guess one of her normal duties is there's this man named Max who comes around every week to have his blood taken because he's got some kind of weird, unusual condition where his body produces an abnormal amount of, like, hormones and, like, antibodies. Thing is, though, Zoe hates Max. Max is a creep. He's a weirdo. He doesn't belong here. Karma police arrest that man. So anyways, in the process of drawing his blood, he's like, oh, Zoe, look at this. And he, like, rolls up his sleeve, and he has, like, her name carved into it, and she's just like, nope, no, we're not doing it. He's, like, upset, and then she leaves, and she goes to, like, a graduation party kind of thing, and she goes down to the downstairs to get some beer, because they're storing it in the morgue, because that's what those crazy med students do, right? And the Max is, like, kind of waiting for her, and he springs a trap, and he tries to, force himself on her, shall we say. And in the process, one of the dead guys in the morgue just suddenly wakes up, and he's a little bitey, and he, takes a chunk out of Max. And then she runs back upstairs to get help, and finds now there's, zombie apocalypse happening. And she makes it out, and she runs away. So, come to find out, it's now 4 years later, she's living in a Rocky Mountain refugee center kind of thing. It's like a enclosed camp where it's got military personnel and civilians. It's similar to the original script rather than the movie, the original movie, where you have civilians living in like a sort of like a hastily thrown together camp. Well, in this case, they're actually still inside the bunker, but still. And then you have like a bunch of military people. It's sort of like a middle ground between the two, because in the original movie, there were like less than 10 people total in the bunker. In this one, there's shown to be like, there's like whole families and there's a bunch of soldiers, but it's not quite a full-blown city like it was in the original script. So anyways, she's like the doctor for the camp, and she's dating one of the soldiers named Baka, who is brother of the guy who runs the camp. Now, this is a little weird that they made the switch that... Because in the original script, in the original movie, rather, her boyfriend's name was Miguel, and the villainous captain was Captain Rhodes. In this movie, her boyfriend is a guy named Baka, and the villain is a guy named Miguel. Don't know why they made that change, but whatever. And so they decide, because there's this little girl named Lily who is ill. She has pneumonia. So Zoe's like, hey, I was a medical student. I went to this college. I know the passwords to the doors and stuff. I know the locks. I can make an exception, and we'll go do a little raid. I know it's a little outside our comfort zone, but we'll go and raid the college. We'll get the medical supplies, and we'll have a ton of medicine left over, and it'll be, best for everyone. So, reluctantly, Commander Miguel agrees. So they go out and they do their little expedition. On the way out, Zoe's like, hey, I'm gonna be irresponsible and leave the military escort, and I'm gonna go and get some, old bric-a-brac I left around in my desk. And in the process, Zombie Max sees her, and I guess he's just been waiting there this whole time. So Zombie Max attacks her, and it causes all the other Rotters, as they call them in the movie, to swarm on the other soldiers' positions. One of the soldiers gets killed in the battle, but they manage to make it out with the medicine, and they make it back to camp, and, Miguel is not happy that he lost one soldier, but guess what? Zombie Max has clung to the bottom of one of the Humvees. Because guess what? Zombie Max is a super smart special zombie. Oh! So, Zombie Max kind of, sneaks around, and he's not only, intelligent for, a zombie, he's also, super, agile and can, climb walls like Spider-Man or something. And he sneaks inside the base super stealthily and causes some havoc, kills a couple of people, and he gets Zoe cornered, but then the soldiers show up and they, restrain him. Well, they're about to kill him, basically, because, he's just a zombie and he's in the base, but Zoe's like, no, he's special, we need to keep him chained up so I can study him, because he had the chance to bite her, but he didn't, and at first she doesn't realize who he is, and then they get him chained up, and she starts studying him, and what this kind of turns into is it's a similar situation to the original movie, where she needs Rotters to get samples from. In the original movie, they had a cave in the back where they kept a bunch of Rotters penned in, or zombies, I should say. I hate using that term, Rotters, it just... Ugh. Anyways, so they had a bunch of zombies penned up in the cave in the back in the original movie, and there was a scene where they go to get some more zombies to bring back to Dr. Frankenstein's lab, and two of the zombies escape, and a bunch of the soldiers get killed. In this case, there's a similar situation where they go outside the gate to bring in some zombies to keep as samples, but the whole thing ends up getting booched, and a bunch of soldiers die, and then it turns to a thing where, Miguel is much like Rhodes in the original. He doesn't want he doesn't want any of the science phony baloney going on. He just wants to kill all the zombies and be done with it. And in the original movie, Miguel, in the original movie, Rhodes was, like I mentioned, he was just kind of a horrible human being and a jerk all around. But in this movie, they still do make Miguel be kind of like a jerk, but he makes a lot more sense in this movie because really everything bad that happens in the movie is Zoe's fault. Like, there's several occasions in the movie where basically it's like Zoe wanting to do something and it results in everyone getting killed. Stuff happens. They have zombie Max chained up in the basement. One point he manages to grab the key. He escapes and he goes in the original movie, Miguel, the character named Miguel in the original movie, who was the main character's boyfriend, he is like suffering from severe PTSD. He was constantly on drugs to keep him like sedated. He decides to end it all by letting the zombies flood the base and kill everyone. In this movie, zombie Max escapes and opens the gates and lets the zombies in. Now this is where things really start to fall apart. There's this, like I mentioned earlier, there's that little girl, Lily. Zombie Max is holding her hostage prior to this, and what's her name? Zoe is like, let her go, you can have me instead. So he like drops the little girl. After he opens the gate and the zombies start flooding in, the little girl Lily runs outside the gate, and for some reason the zombies just ignore her. And then like Zoe runs after her, but the zombies are still like pouring in, but for some reason they just kind of ignore those two and then go and like basically kill everyone except for Baka, who gets bitten. And they run out there, and then there's a confrontation with Zombie Max, and Zombie Max is like, you belong to me, or no, he says like, you're mine, and then she goes like, no, you're mine, and then she chops his head off, and a really fake looking zombie head prop falls off. It's really great. Then she runs back with the little girl to the now zombie infested bunker. Baka's just kind of like sitting there, and like Baka's about to like kill himself, so she's like, don't kill yourself, I have the vaccine now, somehow I can like cure you. So he's like, no, I'm gonna die, and she convinces him. So then like it cuts to her like administering the vaccine to him in the basement laboratory of the presumably zombie-filled bunker, and then like she's like, oh, he's cured. And then it's like her like in the radio room like being like, attention anyone listening, we have the cure now for the zombie bites. Anyone can come here, our doors are welcome. And then it shows like her and a bunch of like kids and stuff like from earlier in the movie. They're all like outside and it's nice and stuff, and it's just like, wait, what happened to all the zombies that were like flooding into the bunker and like eating everyone? It's really dumb. It's just a dumb ending to like a stupid movie. But I mentioned earlier, of the 3 Day of the Dead tangentially related films that are like Day of the Dead 2 Contagium, the Nick Cannon remake, and this one is easily the best of the 3, but it's still a bad movie by most metrics. Now take this from a person who's seen way more zombie movies than I care to admit. It's not the worst I've ever seen. In fact, it's pretty far from the bottom. I mean, if you're somebody who, for some godforsaken reason, in 2018 is still like, yeah, zombie, I'd recommend you watch it. I would also recommend that you, like, sort your life out. Maybe, I don't know. If you like movies that are supposed to be set in America but are blatantly filmed in Eastern Europe, I'd recommend this movie. That's something else I kind of wanted to touch on earlier but forgot to mention. Eastern Europe is where zombie movies go to die. For example, the 2008 remake of Day of the Dead was shot in Bulgaria. Return of the Living Dead 4, Necropolis, and Return of the Living Dead 5, Rave to the Grave, which were both absolute garbage films, and they were filmed in back-to-back in the Ukraine and in Romania. Yeah, I guess it's really easy. I guess it's really cheap to shoot films in the former Eastern Bloc. There's no real reason to watch zombie movies. They're all the same, basically. The only ones I'd really recommend are the original trilogy of Dawn of the Dead, Night of the Living Dead, Day of the Dead, and then Return of the Living Dead 1. Those are 4 fantastic films. I'm sure there's some other movies I can't think of right now, but even then, those are kind of fringe cases. Oh, Diary of the Dead. I really like Diary of the Dead. Reanimator. The Wreck movies. And then Demons. Though Wreck and Demons are also kind of fringe cases where the creatures have are similar to zombies, but they're not really zombies. They're actually, well, demons. So I don't even know if they really count. Also, the first 28 Days Later is a pretty good movie, but people will love to argue that those aren't really zombies. And then there's also Shaun of the Dead, which is a good movie. It's, I've watched it so many times that the jokes are no longer funny to me, but it's still a good movie. I recommend that one. Anything else there's a 9 out of 10 chance it's just straight garbage. So, oh god, especially Resident Evil. Don't even get me started on the Resident Evil films, which, incidentally, George A. Romero wrote a script for a Resident Evil movie, the original one, and then it was actually followed the video games kind of closely, but the studio didn't want to film it, so they went with a different script, which was the piece of shite that we now have, known as the Resident Evil movie. But yeah, that's about all. It's a bad movie about main character making stupid mistakes and everyone getting punished for it. But it's okay, because in the end, the last 5 people on Earth are don't have to worry about dying of zombie bites now, unless they just get eaten alive. I mean, that's always a possibility. Oh well. Bad movie, don't watch it. Have a great day. Bye.